G'day, guys. This is a special on the coronavirus. So I decided to basically do a night sort of shift between 11 p.m. in Australia. So just to basically do a bit of a quick update on the virus itself, some general information, sort of to sort of help people sort of get an idea what to look out for and stuff like that. Sort of get a understanding of generally what how we should look at it, in what terms and stuff like that. Anyway, I've got a few notes and I'll just go through them and just do a bit of a rundown, and then we'll start just doing a sort of a virus related Q&A. Okay, so basically, the symptoms from what most of the medical establishments have actually worked out usually appear between 3 and 7 days after you've been exposed to the virus. So it depends on the person. It depends on their pre-existing health conditions and a whole lot of other factors when that actually shows. The COVID-19, as this coronavirus type is actually referred to, is basically one that basically attaches itself primarily to the lungs. So that's where it actually does its nasty work. It basically has a sort of a death rate currently at about 3%. That's for the general population. Obviously, in certain age groups, it's much lower. For instance, in my age group, it's about 1.3. In people that are 80, it's up to 14.8% or around 15%. So it actually varies, the death rate, but the average is about 3%. People that are in their 40s, it's about 0.4, and right down to very low numbers in younger people. Younger people are more likely to be carriers rather than, victims, because it's usually people with underlying conditions with a number of health issues that are more susceptible, because it is a respiratory disease. It does, most of these coronaviruses do attack the lungs and do their nasty work in that area. So when you compare it to the Spanish influenza, which had a death rate of 2.5%, it's slightly more dangerous in that regard. But obviously, there was a different era, and there was a different medical system at the time, different capacities to keep it under control. There were none of the modern sort of none of the antibiotics and stuff like that as well. You have to consider, so pneumonia, which is basically the prime killer with this virus, is basically, you need antibiotics to deal with it if it really gets out of control. So its virulence in comparison to the flu. Now the flu's got a virulence of 1.28. This type of coronavirus, COVID-19, has a virulence of 3.28. So it's about 2.5 times more virulent. This is why the governments around the world have gone crazy in basically spraying everything down and trying to basically clean surfaces and trying to keep people isolated because of the virulence that it exists. I mean, if you think about it, what they're doing is required if you want to really prevent greater deaths. It's just one of those necessary evils, unfortunately. If you take a look at when you constrain a virus, and I think I mentioned it last time about Ebola and used Ebola as an example. When you constrain a virus, it basically, but when there are few hosts that it's actually interacting between, it basically starts signaling to each other and modulating and saying, well, we're not getting very far. We can't kill these hosts. So it actually becomes less dangerous, less virulent, in many respects, in order to survive in these hosts and be able to perpetuate. So basically isolating and keeping things under control actually makes the virus less dangerous in a sense over the long haul. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep contain the virus from spreading rapidly through the general population in order to basically, not overwhelm the system, because there's only so many beds for people in critical care that hospitals have, and they know that most people are going to get the virus. They're not stupid; they understand that, and I think most of us understand that as well. That most of us are going to end up getting it to some degree, but the reality is not all of us are going to succumb, and if we can keep it from spreading rapidly, it means that less people are going to turn up in emergency, less will end up in ICU, which means that the medical system will be able to cope. That means they'll be able to cope in basically dealing with the more severe cases, pneumonia and stuff like that. So, this is why it's actually being done. I know there's a lot of people on the web, fear mongering and saying all sorts of things and crazy sort of things and conspiratorial nonsense and stuff like that. But that's not helping anyone, and it's putting at risk people that are more susceptible. So older people, your grandparents, as an example, it's putting those people at risk. So these people basically don't give a shit about your family or your relatives or people that may be in your family at greater risk, for these that have got compromised immune systems, that are less healthy for whatever reason, lifestyle factors or whatever else, age, there's a lot of factors why people are, bad advice that they followed through their life. There's a number of factors. So, we can't just point the finger of blame, but at the end of the day, these people are susceptible. So keeping the sort of the spread at contained to some extent will help save lives in the long run. People that are at greater risk. Now, symptoms sort of range from mild headaches to more severe sort of pneumonia type difficulties, where it's shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, stuff like that. Also, one of the prime symptoms, which I showed in that study in the previous vid that I did on the corona, which I showed the Chinese study, one of the biggest percentage was fever. That was one of the prime symptoms. So obviously there's a small percentage of people that won't even get that symptomatology. They just won't have any fever, but they will basically be a carrier. So and that's true as well, especially in younger people. So usually it's about 38 Celsius or above. And that is one thing I did forget. 38 Celsius to Fahrenheit. Let me just get that figure. Just bear with me for a sec, guys. Oh, God almighty, when you try and do these things. That's why I was trying to get some notes together, so I wouldn't have to do this thing. You always forget something. So that's 38 is 100 in Fahrenheit. So if you're basically 38 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or over or higher, you basically that's one of the main symptoms. Also, there's another one that usually accommodates that, which is a heart rate that increases by 20 points. So if you get a high heart rate, that's another sort of indication of this that you've got the virus potentially. That is, you still need to be tested. Other sort of flu-like symptoms that are similar to this respiratory type virus is coughs, sore throats, joint pain, general malaise, where you just sort of feel not really strong, a bit weakened and stuff like that, chest pain, cold chills, things like you can get a number of things that that will, a bit of sneezing, a bit of coughing and stuff like that, that are part of this, sometimes in mild forms, sometimes in, more severe forms. It depends on the person, it depends on a lot of it depends on how quick it actually has proliferated within that person, how weak that person is, underlying conditions and whatever else. Usually, also a low white blood cell count if you do actually a test. It tends to spread via coughing and sneezing, up to about, so if you're talking to somebody that's, sort of not feeling so well and they're about 2 meters away from you, that's a sort of distance that you are susceptible to. So that's one thing to take into consider. It's really hard with these things to protect yourself 100%. It's the reality is, we try to minimize as much as possible. Now, the sort of stuff you can do, I believe I did mention last time, certain things. I'll just sort of go over some of those things. Remember the vitamin D, very important, that, you get either a lot of sun, that means exposure to the sun, and get your vitamin D levels. But if you're in an environment where, there's minimal sun, not enough, you can't get enough vitamin D, then you should consider basically, supplementing. And because it actually is a respiratory type infection, which actually, can cause pneumonia, studies have shown that 4,000 IU, which is international units, or 100 micrograms, which is mcg, you'll find on the packet, is basically how much you need, which is usually 4 pills per day, in order to basically keep your vitamin D status to a good level to basically protect you. Because what happens is these sort of viruses tend to basically try to downregulate D3 receptors. Because remember, your killer T cells, they are coated with vitamin D3 receptors. So you definitely need to basically provide sufficient to give those T cells, a good opportunity to give this virus a good whacking, so keep that in mind. Now, one thing that we don't have to worry about is zinc. Zinc also inhibits viral replication, which is really good. So eat your red meat. If you're traveling, because some people say, well, it's really hard. I'm traveling. I've got, then I would say for flights, use, there's a zinc acetate lozenge, and that's something you can take on the flight. And, it helps basically. It's an essential, immune, supporter, reduces reactive oxygen species, general, it helps with general inflammation and stuff like that. But it's, the key thing is this inhibiting the replication. And when you're in flight, you're at greater risk of getting something and, and it replicating in your system. So it's, one of those strategies. The other one is, other sort of things are selenium, which really help. I've supplemented in the past, and I've recommended it also for cancer as well, and many other things. Selenium is really, really important because it basically it's involved in basically glutathione production. So it's one of those, again, it's got a rate limiting function. It basically is required. Now, in terms of the with glutathione production, from selenium you go to the oxidized form, and then you go to riboflavin, and then the reduce, and there's this cycle of recycling sort of glutathione. So riboflavin is B2, as you know. So I drink 2 glasses of milk a day, which gives me 100% of my riboflavin requirements, let alone meat has plenty of it and stuff like that. It has also eggs I consume, and liver now and then, and that has selenium. So keep that in mind. These are sort of foods, that we carnivores tend to consume, which are really helpful for us. Vitamin E also helps increase, so in that case, I mean, I would consider a supplement, like that, the Jarrow low dose, maybe, I mean, I'm not a Puritan when it comes to these sort of things. And, maybe you basically get yourself a palm oil or something like that, and sort of, have a spoonful of that every day to sort of, because it helps increase the sort of resistance to viruses, the other thing is vitamin C, that also increases, your sort of your white blood cells, helps the immune system in that regard, and, increases interferon that kills off, infected cells, so that limits the proliferation. So it has its role. I mean, it does have downsides when in the general carnivore. I mean, we use uric acid primarily, but in cases like these sort of coronal type viruses, it can be helpful to sort of supplement for a limited period in that regard, especially when you end up, getting any symptomatology and all that. But, even if there are people around you potentially, I'd consider it, throw it in your toolkit. I mean, the key one is D3, that is the key one, because that also is involved, and all the fat soluble vitamins play a role, as you can see, vitamin E, vitamin D, retinol, MK4, all of these play a role in collagen degrading enzymes and regulating all that sort of stuff, and remember, these viruses go after cells. They go in there, they try to replicate, they try to cause havoc, they try to cause dysregulation. They usually upregulate matrix metalloproteinases and dysregulate and cause damage in the lungs. This is what eventually weakens your lungs' ability to fight pneumonia. That's always, in some people it's present in there, but it's suppressed. The other thing that vitamin D does, plays an important role with calcium metabolism. So does MK4. And remember that calcium is used by the body to suppress viruses. So that's an important factor as well, to consider, how you actually modulate all those sort of functions within the lungs and within the general body. So keep that in mind as well. Other things that are important are sort of nitric oxide. That has been shown to sort of inhibit viral replication as well. Especially, it actually showed an improvement when it came to SARS, and SARS was actually far more lethal than this one, So in that regard, I would consider any nitric oxide booster like L-citrulline, which I've mentioned before, would be very useful in that regard. So keep that in mind. High quality honey has its place. It tends to have antibacterial, antiviral, but also it has another property, which is an anti-adhesive. So it actually creates issues for viruses in order to adhere, and bacteria to adhere as well. So it has some, I mean, the science is very murky in this when it comes to honey, so I'm not going to basically put my head on and say, there's 100%, you're going to get a massive benefit. You're not. It's a bit of all these things help. Remember, at the end of the day, general good nutrition and, where you don't have severe deficiencies, your body can work properly and can fight off things. That's what's going to make you healthy. Obviously there are certain things that you need in a slightly increased amount in order to give your body that increased resistance, that increased strength in that regard. I mean, the other thing that I would do is, autophagy also defends against, invading pathogens and bacteria and viruses and all that. Can also inhibit viruses from surviving in infected macrophage or cells. So it actually has its place. And autophagy also can help the body from, toxins, generated by pathogens, so it can clear out some of this sort of junk and gunk in cells and all that. There are diminishing returns once you've become quite severely infected, and you may be weakened and all that. Autophagy has its place, and it's a sort of a mixed bag. Obviously, the body generally, when you're sick, most animals just don't want to eat, which is a good thing, because it gives the body the ability. It's not focused on basically on basically dealing with food and sort of metabolizing that, but it's focused on gearing up the system to fight the infection. And so fasting has its place. Another thing is, if you've got weakened immune system, which a lot of people, because of our modern lifestyles, have in some regards, consider a 72-hour water salt type fast. Do the standard sort of stuff like the snake juice and stuff like that. Don't do silly things. If you've got any underlying conditions and all that, obviously it's probably not advisable to do. Unfortunately, you don't want to be taking risks. Try to use the other methods, the vitamin D and all the other sort of selenium and things like that, to sort of boost and strengthen your system. But if you don't have any underlying conditions and all that, and you're able to fast, I would consider fasting for 72 plus hours, because you will renew your basically you rebuild your immune system. I know this was going to go for 5 minutes and it's gone for 20 minutes now, but there's so many things to actually say. I've nearly finished. Sorry about this. It's just taking a bit longer than I thought. Sort of susceptibilities that you sort of need to look out for are things like smoking, ACE2 type receptors that the virus can use, upregulated by smoking. So that can be a hazard to your health. So if you smoke, you're going to upregulate these receptors and these gene pathways, which basically means you're going to create a sort of a nice door for the virus to walk through. So keep that in mind. Maybe you need to limit your smoking, or possibly even go on to a patch, and give it up for a while, the act of smoking, and just use a patch for your addiction. Or one of those, the sort of, what do they call, the chewing gum type things that are used. So yeah, use something like that. Don't smoke, especially if you get infected. Please don't smoke. You'll really help the thing really take off in your body. Air pollution can also be a problem. Cadmium is sort of can be elevated in the environment. This was shown in some areas of China where the rate of the sort of disease was far more, sort of stronger. It sort of elevates interleukin-4 inflammation levels. It sort of affects the metabolites that are involved in fatty acid metabolism. Sort of leads to sort of a more lung inflammation, which is, this is really involved in sort of, it's a respiratory infection. So, that's the last thing you want. And that's the other issue with a lot of people, like in Melbourne, in particular Canberra and Sydney, where they had a lot of smoke going through, a lot of air pollution. There would have been some of these substances in those pollutants, which means it's probably made the people in these parts a bit more vulnerable than what they would have been otherwise. So they probably need to consider these sort of options, especially if you've been affected by bushfires and stuff like that, in that type of air pollution as well. Alcohol as well can be a problem. Small amounts actually can assist the immune system. So small little shots in the evening are probably helpful. Large amounts will weaken your immune system. So it's a sort of a diminishing returns. So keep that in mind. The other thing that's really important is, sleep. I can't emphasize, sleep, melatonin, it helps increase your T cell production. So if you're not getting enough sleep, and here's me at 11:30 p.m. at night, Not asleep yet. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. The things that I do for you guys. That you do, you will have a weakened immune system. So keep that in mind. You've got to get sleep's important, guys. It's not only nutrition, exercise, sleep. They're all important to basically have a healthy body. There's no free lunches, unfortunately. That's the reality of life. There are other things that you can actually do to mitigate sort of susceptibility. There's there's some evidence that infrared really and red light therapy also help, because they sort of reduce free radical oxidative stress and stuff like that. So they have their usefulness. Doing 10 minutes a day of both infrared and red light therapy can be good. I think it's about for infrared, I think it's about 10. You shouldn't be closer than 10 centimeters or something like that. I mean, you should get on the device, if you can get access to it, if it's affordable for you, if you can afford it. I mean, I don't have these devices either. So, at the end of the day, it's, horses for courses, as they say. Now, there's a couple of other things that we really need to, keep in mind. What are the normal immune responses that the body has? Your body basically responds in the following ways to get rid of something. You're coughing, obviously, always into your armpit so it doesn't spread, or sneezing, always into your armpit, so you don't spread the thing and put other people at risk. But at the same time, your body actually uses these natural forms of spreading, of coughing, sneezing, and heating up your body, in order to remove or kill off these pathogens. So, unless you've got a very high fever, I mean really high fever, that can be dangerous, because very high fever can be dangerous. There, I would say, yes, use some sort of paracetamol or something like that, to sort of, bring it down a bit. But you don't want to bring it down too much, because when you suppress these sort of normal reactions of the body to fight, because that's part of the immune system, immune response, you don't want to weaken it. What you do is you end up, slowing down the recovery. And also you'd end up also increasing the lung bacteria infection load. And especially if you've got underlying conditions, pre-existing underlying conditions, that's the last thing you want to do. That's one way, a quick way to death. If pneumonia really gets out of control, it'll kill you. So you basically fever within a certain parameter, not extreme fever, but elevated fever is a good thing. Welcome it, because that heating effect basically is a healing effect. So don't try to undermine it with fucking toughen up, grow a spine. Basically you need the body to basically heal itself. You need to help it with good nutrition, with some of these vitamins and minerals that actually play an important role in that regard. So that's my sort of spew on that in that regard. Let me just, I need to turn off this background. Do you like the background? Anyway, I thought it was cute. Have the virus close by. Nothing. Okay, let's turn this off, because I need to add something to here. Let's get rid of this. Okay, back to normal. Okay, now let me just share the screen. Okay, we are sharing. Okay, now let me get rid of that. Oops. Now, sort of things that we've talked about before when it comes to riboflavin, you're looking at beef. That's got zinc as well. Things like milk, got plenty. Salmon, pork. So, eggs. So these are the sort of foods, as you can see, most are animal foods that have got couple of eggs, 20%, 5 eggs, you got all your riboflavin. So keep that in mind. Selenium is in liver and eggs, very good source. So keep that in mind. And I'll just stop that for a while, and we will get back. Let me just check that nobody's been held up their comments. Nope. Okay. So we'll probably extend this a bit longer. Let me go through and just check to see what sort of questions we've got. Somebody's having a friggin' good time, aren't they? Sunbaking and everything. It's a way to do it anyway. Get your vitamin D in there. Worried about my parents in Auckland. They are so blasé, which is, yeah, look, a lot of people are blasé about it. They're not only your parents. They just, I mean, have they got good nutrition? You may have to have a bit of a chat with them in regards to, yeah. Yep, there's a strong possibility if it's not contained. I've looking at Europe and all that, it's already spread quite rapidly, and it hasn't been contained very well, especially in Italy. So yeah, it's got a bit out of hand in some countries, and some countries are a bit blasé about it. Not taking it very serious. Even the World Health Organization has pointed this out about a number of countries, but that's one of the problems. Yeah, I know. People have just gone crazy about toilet rolls. I had a hard time actually getting. I was down to 2 damn rolls, and basically I had to go very early in the morning to basically get access to toilet paper. So I bought one of those big that will actually cover me for a month. So I don't have to go out hunting for toilet paper again. Sick and tired of that sort of. Just crazy. People are just the key thing is yeah, it was nice, the actual head. I'll actually bring it back. Put the head up. What do you think? Yeah, why not? Yeah, it looks good. Looks good. Anyway, continue going. So Humanimal, there are many people going to think that they COVID, they just have the cold or flu. Yeah, that's true. Look, some people may end up just having a cold or a flu. It's going to be really hard, especially in the southern hemisphere, because we're heading towards our winter, which basically means that people won't know whether they've got the flu, the general flu, and all that. They'll have to get themselves checked. It's just going to be one of those things. I was working in a woman's house the other day, and she was coughing and sneezing all day, but you still feel fine. Look, there are colds around. I mean, I had the previous week, I had a bit of a cold that was going around, so yeah, it doesn't mean that necessarily it's the coronavirus or something like that. So, in that regard. Yep. So yeah, basically vitamin, iron, look, just general nutrition, but the focus is on some things are really needed. Actually, when it comes to respiratory infections, vitamin D3 is really important. Remember those T cells, those T killer cells, they're wrapped in D3 receptors. So they need support. And the actual viruses try to downregulate the actual D3 receptors. So that's why it's important to basically have that level. So when you're hit by the virus, those T's, they've actually got plenty of vitamin D around to basically go after these little suckers, because that's what's going to keep you healthier in that regard. A bit late. I'm on a train to a plane getting out of UK. I don't blame you, mate. Heading for the mountains. Look, yeah. If you can get access to a zinc lozenge, get one. So really try and get a zinc lozenge and try and get vitamin D supplementation, so you've got it with you as you're going. Yeah, so really important in that regard. Yeah, I pretty much consume. It's got high levels. The two big vitamins in raw milk is riboflavin and B12, all required for good, healthy bodies to function properly. So yes, it's a good food in that regard. Humanimal. Friend's daughter arrived in London a few days ago. She's got the virus. So my friend stays at home for 10. Yeah, look, you got to isolate yourself. It's just that one of those realities. You feel sorry for the vegans. Well, we may have less opponents around after this one. If you're deficient, you're deficient. You put yourself at risk. Let that be a lesson to you. I feel for all humans. I don't want to see anybody, pass away or die. But, at the end of the day, you can hit your head against a wall. They don't learn. Sometimes the hard way is, it's awful, but sometimes that may be a lesson to others not to go down that pathway and put their bodies at risk and weaken them. So Dominic, basically that, Irish beef is so good and he'll be feasting. So I don't blame him. I'd be feasting on good animal red meat as well if I was you. I'm in Scotland, not a true amount of cases yet. Oh, well, you're lucky in that regard. You can only hope that it doesn't increase in that regard. So yeah, look, basically you need about 72 hours to recycle your immune system. So, you can, if you're basically, you don't have any susceptibility at the moment. Yep. If you do, and you do have it, then I would just use intermittent fasting. So you can get a bit of autophagy, but providing sufficient nutrition in that time-restricted feeding to basically boost the immune system and then give your immune system time to use those nutrients to basically fight. So it's sort of, you don't want to be eating for long periods of time. You want a time-restricted feeding like 6 to 4 hours. So to get good nutrition in, and then basically allow your body to fight with that good nutrition. So, but if you're basically healthy at the moment, 72-hour fast, because we've got so many assaults on our bodies. There are so many assaults that are happening on our bodies continuously in our environment. So our immune systems get taxed. So it's always a good thing to periodically have these long fasts to sort of recycle our immune system and sort of rebuild it to be stronger, to be able to withstand some of these, situations. Our ancestors out of necessity did that, but, so what's this? Take it vaping. It's just as bad then. Yeah. Look, it depends on the vaping. It's if it's basically, as long as it doesn't have like it doesn't have any sort of stuff there that could actually create I would sort of stay clear of anything, whether it's vaping or smoking, because you don't really know what the substances are in, and I would go for patches, so or gum, you know, so you can get your nicotine. I don't know there are different brands of nicotine gum. Um, and it depends on the country, because some countries, you can actually buy them over the counter in pharmacies. In other countries, you have to basically get a prescription. So, you need to investigate that. So if you're a smoker and you want to avoid to put yourself at greater risk, and you find it difficult to give up smoking, because I've been a smoker in the past and I know the addiction is very hard to give up. Took me a number of times to give up. Then consider something like patches, or gum. Most people, from my experience, find gum much better. Why? Because they fulfill that addiction. The sort of this sort of addiction, they sort of cover that by having gum. So people tend to yeah, in that regard. Yeah, the sort of this in those early stages, it's a mixed bag. There's about the younger you are, it seems that the fever is much milder, and that's where it's confusing to people, because sometimes it can just be like a regular cold or the flu. It's really hard. It's usually in people, especially over 40, where they will notice a slightly elevated temperature. So yeah, it's one of those hard things, and sometimes people won't actually show any fever, even though they may already be contagious at day 3. They may not show fever until about seven to plus days before they actually show any of those signs. It has to do with your level of nutrition, how healthy you are, underlying pre-existing conditions. There's a lot of factors at play. Genetics, that's another thing at play. I mean, I've got one of the genetics, a really bad genetic, that actually makes me more susceptible to certain viruses, like the ones on ships, the travelers type viruses, and you get the shits. Yeah, I've got one of those, so when I get them, yeah, I'm on the toilet. So in that regard, so, people have different susceptibilities, genetic susceptibilities. So there will be differences, so it's one of those hard things to nail down sometimes in that regard. Well, as a general rule, I mean, there are other things as well. I mean, for instance, steroids is a problem. Certain drugs are a problem. They make the body a bit more vulnerable to these infections. So they weaken, and also, they tend to allow the body to be hijacked much easier. So there's a lot of other factors at play, lifestyle factors as well. Stress, that's another one. If your immune system is weak because of stress, that opens you up again. So that's a big one that many people sort of ignore in that regard. So yoga, mindful sort of thinking, doing breathing exercises to sort of relieve tension and stuff like that. Really important, I would say, for people. So consider all that. Oops, overshot. Now let's just take a look. Thanks, mate. What do I think? For example, Sweden, not trying to stop the spread, but trying to create flock immunity fast. I think that's crazy. For the simple reason is that this is not your run of the mill. In the past, I mean, like flus and stuff like that, they're run of the mill and all that. When the body knows something or has immunity to part of the coating, because Viruses have like a coating, and they have like, even though they mutate, some of the characteristic proteins remain the same, so they don't change. And so the body can recognize and has already got, a program set up to fight. But the problem is that if something absolutely new, and this one is slightly new, it's not something that, and this is why it's so virulent. Like SARS was even more virulent because it was even one of those coronaviruses that was even more different. MERS was even worse. Which was the one in the Middle East. I forget the actual name, Middle East and something, whatever it was called. And that was actually, very very virulent. It had a virulency just below that of Ebola, but it wasn't as a killer like Ebola, but so there are cases where you don't really want that. There are cases, yes, general flu, stuff like that. Yep, that's not a problem. But with cases like this, you definitely don't want, when a population hasn't been exposed to these sort of pathogens, usually they can cause a lot of havoc. So I think that's ill-advised. Just think, Aborigines in Australia, Maoris in New Zealand, North American Plain Indians never had immunity to a lot of the European and Eurasian type diseases. What happened when 90% of the population was wiped out? Now, that's not going to happen with, with this virus, but it will spread rapidly, and basically it will make a lot of people that are susceptible, that have got weakened immune systems or whatever, from poor diets, from whatever, from underlying conditions, and they will overwhelm the system. And that's the problem. If you overwhelm the system, then you're into triage, which basically means you live, you die. That's what triage is. And you don't want that. That's why you want to contain it, so the spread is slow, so people do get infected, but at a slower rate, which means the medical system can cope. So if they're doing something like that, they're absolutely crazy. That's all I can say. Haven't they learned anything? Yes. What is Mullin? Never heard of it. I think no type of smoking is probably a good thing, because any sort of smoking particulates actually affect this ACE2 receptor. So I think you're opening yourself up to any type of smoking, has a tendency of basically opening up the front door to the virus and saying, well, here you go. This is we've upregulated this pathway for you to basically, hijack and really take off. So, I would say no to most of this sort of stuff. Situation within 30 miles of us, 2 unconfirmed cases in our town. Shelves empty in our store. Yeah. Toilet paper issues. Yep. I understand. Kind of crazy. Yeah, I know. Yeah, people are just, yeah, God. Yeah, what can one say? Yes. The young vegan children, they are probably the ones at highest risk because of nutrient deficiencies. So we're probably going to see some of those not survive. Yeah. So yeah, it's a worry, because just give me a sec, because I just overshot again. I can't believe I did that. What's this one? I'm in isolation. You've got symptoms. You cheated no carbs. Don't forget to give your card back to Frankie. Yeah, look, if you're a smoker, that's your best option. So to deal with your addiction, because stress isn't a good thing either. So deal with your addiction. You can always give up at a later play time. You know, yeah, mate, I'm in the same boat. I'm 54 this year, so I'm in the 1.3%. So yeah, tell me about it. So which is the same sort of level as the general flu in that regard. But people do die from the general flu. So, and luckily, I've worked very hard to fix my underlying conditions in the last decade, which should keep me alive. Well, we will see. What about stench? Yeah, he takes roids and all that. He's not helping. He's not going to help himself in this sort of condition. In this sort of environment. As I said, we may have a smaller opposition after this. So Humanimal, he uses Nicorette gum when I gave up smoking. Look, different people use other methods. I end up using some other medication, Zyban it was actually called, and that sort of I don't think it's in hindsight I wouldn't have used it now. You know, basically it was so addictive. It basically gave you a high. You could basically not sleep. So I had to literally go for like 10K walks in order to get it out of my system, to tire myself so much in order to be able to, so I wouldn't say it's the best way of actually giving up smoking, but I didn't go through the whole prescription that I was actually given by my doctor. I only went through about 2/3, and then I was able to, it just helped take off the edge, which made it much easier for me to give up that last time. So, but yeah, it's got its issues. Humanimal, my friend just had his gallbladder out. Ugh. He's vegan. Well, use it or lose it. If you're not using it to basically move bile out to deal with fat, you basically, on a low fat diet. Most people, because they're on so many carbs nowadays, 70% plus carbs in their diet, they don't use their gallbladder as much. They've got poorer, nutrition, poorer absorption because of weakened, stomach. And I've said, all pathology starts in the stomach. If your pH isn't low, I've been saying this for ages. If your pH isn't low enough to basically absorb your nutrition and also kill off those bacteria in your basically in your stomach and in your small intestine, there only should be a small amount that are basically residing in your colon and not beyond that. And that's that's the way to maintain healthy. We're designed to eat animal foods and have a healthy, digestive system. Something that we've lost, or a lot of us have, unfortunately. So good nutrition is important. Yes, I don't know whether your mate's going to, make it or not. If he's got poor nutrition, it doesn't help. Luckily, the northern hemisphere is going towards summer, and people are going to naturally get more vitamin D that way. So that could reduce the severity. Problem for us in the south, we're heading towards our winter, so we've got. It's going to be worse for us down here. Let's put it that way. I was listening, but not feeling away. Oh, yeah, fair enough. After sleeping over 10 hours. Oh, look, yeah, everybody needs sleep. Very important, especially with these sort of in viruses around and all that. Okay, helps with asthma symptoms. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, there's my sister had 25 years of asthma. She no longer has asthma. I reversed that. Took me 10 months. Hers was more a nutritional deficiency than anything else, underlying issues. There are other symptomatology, but if you basically, it's just, she was vegetarian for 25 years, the idiot. And, she woke up to herself, lived here. She had no option. She'd come back from Greece. She was living with me. She had no option. She had to eat my food, which meant that without realizing it, in 10 months' time, she was off the puffer. And she's a smoker. Another thing that I've been trying to coax her off, but haven't been successful. Oh, she's a light smoker. She keeps on telling me she's reducing it, but yeah, one of those. Oh, I'll stop one day. Yeah, I've heard that before. I used to say that plenty of times in my previous attempts before my final attempt. Yeah, look, choline and palmitate, which is a saturated fat, is critical for lung surfactant. People who are on a vegan or vegetarian diet tend to have less choline and palmitate in their diet. So if you don't have enough saturated fat, you don't have enough choline, you tend to be more susceptible to those types of respiratory type related issues, asthma being one of them. So basically, you should tell your mate he should be basically consuming tallow in that regard. But, problem is most people will just ignore you. Oops. Just give me a sec. My system is playing up. Okay, so seems to be okay now. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the risk is low. It's a respiratory disease. Young kids may get a bit of a cough and all that, but it's people older, people that have got underlying conditions that are greater risk. Basically, by isolating ourselves, by trying to keep the disease from spreading, we're basically protecting the older people, your grandparents, your parents, from dying off, So, I mean, that's basically what we're doing. I mean, there are younger people that are susceptible. If you're on an inappropriate diet, you've got underlying conditions, and there are many young people that have got diabetes and other health-related issues. They are far more vulnerable. And the type of young people that actually died in China as well were people that had underlying conditions of that sort. So they either had diabetes, cancer, or they had some sort of underlying condition. So keep that in mind. Yep, sleep is very good, and I should be asleep at the moment. Things that I do for you guys. Why didn't the carnivore diet save the Native Americans? Well, basically because the carnivore diet is a high nutrition, but if you've got a virus which comes in, which your body has never recognized, it just bypasses the immune system and basically, proliferates to such a level, can kill you. No, and that's the reality. So, and it could have been winter, and the winter months were, the biggest killers. Less vitamin D. So you're more susceptible. And a lot of them, I remember from stories, a lot of them were more susceptible. There were more deaths in the winter months, and even amongst the colonists, the early colonists, there were more deaths in the winter months. So vitamin D plays a big role. It covers over 1,000 metabolic processes in your body. So it's involved in all sorts of things. Has hormone-like effects, plus an important supporter and regulator of the immune system. So that together with something new that the body doesn't know how to recognize, They didn't. It's not as if they had supplements back then. Yeah, you're pretty much you're a goner. And that's why I was criticizing that sort of Swedish, the comment that was made about Sweden that basically, let's try and get herd immunity. No, God, no, not for something that's basically as virulent as this. That's the last thing you want to do is overwhelm your medical system. That's just crazy sort of thinking. Jenny Smith. There are over 300 people in lining Costco in my city here in Ontario. It didn't open for another 40 minutes. Police are directing traffic. Things are getting a little crazy. Yeah, people are getting a bit panicky. That's true. And that doesn't help anyone. Yep. I know. Look, my sister does keto, carnivore sometimes, but she sort of reverts back to keto. She likes the vegetables, so yeah, one of those things. But at least her I was doing low carb at the time, but low carb and all that really sort of helped in that regard. So yeah. Okay, and now New York, that's nuts. Zinc lozenges. Yep. I mean, look, there are animal foods that have got vitamin C, but at this stage, just get a supplement. At the end of the day, we won't take your carnivore card away from you. Those scenes from China were so distressing. Yeah, I think they were. They were quite distressing, especially we live in a society where we don't expect the state to sort of inhibit our, freedom of movement and all that. But the reality is that when it comes to things like as virulent as this and the risks that it creates and instability, sometimes, I'm sort of, as a person, I'm conflicted, and if I was to say that I'm not conflicted, I'd be lying. Anybody that says they're not conflicted about the situation would be absolutely lying. Causing electrons, oxygen molecules to spin. Look, I've actually done a thing with Bart K on basically 5G and all that. The biggest problem is not so much, like heat shock proteins, the actual radiation side and all these other effects are not an issue. It's more having to do with, how can I put it? It has to do with energy production. So you basically, you're sort of on that your understanding, which has to do with the inner mitochondria, and basically it's the NAD plus. So it's that cycle between NAD plus and NADH, and so that cycling, which is those electrons, that's the thing. It burns through a lot of NAD plus. So what actually increases your NAD plus? Well, all precursors, which are sort of B3 vitamins, niacin, nicotinic acid, which is what I use myself, NR, NMN, things like that, can help in a 5G environment, in an environment where, electromagnetics and blue light and all that deplete your NAD plus. So if you understand that, you know what I mean. So that's, that's part of a protocol and a couple of other things that I'll be doing a video later on 5G and electromagnetism and how to deal with it. So I'll be doing light electromagnetism, water, UV, all these sort of things, deuterium and how they all work and stuff like that, and in a simplistic way that everybody can understand. Rather than using a whole lot of convoluted terminology that just goes over people's heads and is of very little use. So think like pork is a very good source for niacin. So, you should be having pork for breakfast, break your fast with pork, and energize your body. That should be a slogan of mine. And impact, yep. Just another comment in regards to that. Okay. So, you're welcome, mate. Oops. Oh, there. Population reduction method? No, I don't think so. I mean, if this is a method to reduce the population, it's a piss poor method. There are far better bio weapons that you could actually release to really, cull plenty of people. No, it's just basically, an animal virus that basically mutated. The coronaviruses are basically from a number of different animals like bats and stuff like that. And it's not the first time these sort of, they've been around for donkey's years. And they've plagued humanity on a number of occasions. So it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time that we'll get another coronavirus outbreak. They do come around, they do mutate, and sometimes they come back either less nasty or quite nasty. So it depends in that regard. So no, I know there's a lot of nonsense on the web, but if you're really going to engineer something that really eradicated people, you'd come up with something better than that. I mean, that's piss poor. Yep. Yep. There's a comment. I think I've made my point on a lot of that. Jenny, important to donate to food banks. Look, it's important to, at this stage, to not, to basically, keep in mind that that basically, as a community, we need to be united, help each other, help our families and stuff like that. Try to encourage them to adopt good nutrition practices. Get out into the sun. Enjoy the sun. The sun. We're midday persistent hunters. That's what our ancestors were. It's because we've removed the fat soluble vitamins that protect our bodies, because those collagen degrading enzymes, the matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs, they end up doing some of the damage around it when they're dysregulated. But when they're regulated by the fat soluble vitamins, in particular, retinol, which is the animal form of vitamin A, vitamin D3, which is the animal form, MK4, which is the animal form of vitamin K2, these are the things that actually play key regulatory roles in basically maintaining good health. And that means we can go out in the sun, not get burnt. And I've done experiments up to 5 hours without getting burnt. In the past, I would have got burnt like hell. The other thing is keeping PUFA down. So most animal foods have very small amount of essential fatty acids, which is what the body needs, but not excessive amounts. So, when people consume a lot of seed oils and stuff like that, they incorporate that in their skin. They make themselves more vulnerable. They get burnt. They can't go out in the sun. And then they put creams on, which doesn't really help because it just poisons their body with a whole lot of chemicals and stuff like that. So, it's just crazy stuff. We really need to go back to ancestral eating and then enjoy the sun and bathe in the sun, because the sun is, increases our natural vitamin D levels, plus it creates cholesterol sulfur, and sulfonation is very important for both the brain and the general body. So this is what we need to do. We need to basically, enjoy the sun and enjoy fat soluble vitamins from good animal sources. They will keep us healthy and strong. Now, let me just go. You're welcome, mate. Well, there's a whole lot of Okinawan Sardinians that live very long lives that would probably differ with you on pork. Greeks, traditionally we've consumed a lot of pork and lamb. My great grandfather loved pork. He lived to 107. So, I'd tend to differ. This whole confusion about essential fatty acids and the sort of the PUFA type thing from animal, it's a conversion, the ratios. Why is it important? It's because when you're converting LA or ALA, which is the plant forms, because that's what we've considered the essential fatty acids, which is a load of bullshit. Basically, where does that come, that whole ideology? It comes from the plant-based, all these nutritionists and idiots like that pushing that sort of stuff. So the ratios there are important because the conversion pathway for LA into arachidonic acid and ALA into DHA, and if these pathways are overloaded or downregulated or, or not working properly or have limitations, limiting factors, then you may not get what you need. But remember, a third of your brain is made up of PUFA. And more than half, of that third is arachidonic acid. It's not, which is in things like pork. It's not basically, and all your cell membranes have arachidonic acid. Very important for cell repair and cell, integrity, arachidonic acid. So it's been wrongly demonized, and even when you get blue light exposure and blue light toxicity, for not wearing blue light, blockers and stuff like that, you actually deplete arachidonic acid in cells. So it's not a good thing, arachidonic acid is involved in the inflammatory pathways. Yes, that's because it works with the immune system. That's not wrong. It's like LDL finding itself, around, where arterial calcification is happening. That's just because you've injured and inflamed your thing, and LDL turns up. It's part of the immune response to basically, do a bit of a patch job to repair. And it's actually LP little a, actually, which is the hero, because all animals that don't have, that can't produce endogenous vitamin C, they actually upregulate LP little a and uric acid, the antioxidant, which is more potent than vitamin C, and basically LP little a to stitch it all up to fix up the low-grade scurvy or damage that's happened to the endothelium. So there's a lot of nonsense out there and all that. If arachidonic acid was that lethal and that bad, I have less issues about animal-based and less concerns about ratios when it comes to animal sources. Far less concerns in that regard. The concerns are already basically when it comes to ratios in regards to plant sources. We weren't meant to eat plant sources. Most of us have piss poor conversion rates. I tend to be one of those lucky people that have very good conversion rates of LA and ALA. But that's because my ancestors probably were eating a lot of seeds and stuff like that in the Mediterranean. It's just one of those quirks of history than anything else. So most mammals have very, very close stuff in terms of DNA, so most mammals are related to each other. We all came from these small little rodents when the dinosaurs were nearly wiped out. There's only a few of them around, the birds and the alligators and crocodiles. But, so, yeah, I mean, that's the non-issue. I mean, we're very different from pork in terms of DNA, radically different. And so, no, I would, anyway. Just another comment. Have we got any other questions in regards to nothing about meat, nothing about pork, nothing about anything other than the virus itself? So this is what the Q&A is supposed to be about, the virus. So any last minute questions which people want? Any questions, guys, relating to this virus? Nope. Okay, what is the remission timeline? Depends on your underlying conditions. So usually you stop being, and this is generally healthy people, within about a fortnight they tend to basically no longer be contagious, and since the first signs, and not really have any problems in that regard after that. But there are some people that can be contagious up to 3 to even up to 4 weeks, and even more potentially. We don't really know. It really depends. If you've got a really weakened immune system, you're not very healthy, then you're far more susceptible, in that regard. So it really depends, so what's the other question? It's also spreading in warm countries, so summer might not. No, actually, that's not exactly right. Viruses in warm conditions can dry out. So you can, actually in water droplets, if you're talking about humid environments like in the tropics, yes, in the tropics, but that's not summer and winter. They have a wet season and a dry season. In the wet season, which is basically the equivalent to the winter in the northern, if you're in the sort of the summer. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, as an example, when you have your summer, the tropics that are above the equator have their sort of monsoon type, tropical type wet season. Okay, so they have only 2 seasons, and so there's a lot of water droplets, and so they're more susceptible in the tropics. So possibly going on holiday into the tropics is probably not advisable in that part of the year, unless you're going to Bali, which is in the dry season. So if you're going to Bali, which is in the below the equator, it's basically in the dry season in the summer period of the northern hemisphere, and it's winter in Australia, and it's dry season basically in Indonesia. So as a consequence, so it's less of a problem if you basically fly over there and sort of in that regard. So it's really water droplets that can actually carry it over a certain distance. So winter, you get far greater spread than in summer, and plus the vitamin D is another component. So it's usually winter or wet season that you're more vulnerable. So basically, if you're in the northern hemisphere and it's summer there, and you want to fly to a tropical area, don't go to Thailand, go to Bali. Why? Because in Thailand it's in the northern, so it basically means that, so if in your winter in the northern hemisphere, then yep, that's fine. Fly to because it's going to be the actual dry season, so you're going to be less vulnerable in that regard. Okay, so I've lost track a bit. Where are we? Never heard of the system, mate. Don't know about it. If you're talking about GABA, is it something similar or not, or is it some other device like blue light or red light or infrared? Hold on, let me just do a bit of a quick search. Oh, it's actually a drug. Oh, that's for GABA, that wouldn't have nothing to do with in any way helping you. This is a respiratory infection, so no, doesn't have anything to do with it, mate. That wouldn't help you. Respiratory, your vitamin D, your zinc. So eat animal foods. You'll get all that sort of stuff. Selenium. These are the things you need to help yourself. Potentially, it could be going on for different countries, depending on how it's going to spread and all that. I suspect it will. I mean, the authorities pretty much know that it will be happening for a couple of months. So what they're doing is they're trying to basically contain it so it spreads slowly through the population. So those people that are going to be more prone to have more illness and be sicker, they will tend to basically, they'll come in small dribs and drabs. They won't come in as a tidal wave where they'll have to then, basically pick who lives and who dies. So that's the whole reason. Because if doctors are forced to triage, where they basically have to determine who lives and who dies, that's not it's not something people want to do. So this is why containing so it doesn't spread rapidly means that small amounts of people are going to get infected and get very sick, small numbers, and they will remain small within over a number of months. I think the way the authorities are actually managing this at some levels okay, in some other levels, since this is going to be something that they have to contain over a number of months through this year, I don't think they've really thought it out very well, how people are going to feed themselves, how people, all these sort of things, how employment, there's a lot of things, and I think they are just basically, they're being reactive at most levels, and that's sort of the worrying part, and I sort of have links all over the place, and I do hear things around the world as well. Both, I mean, I hope things don't get worse, but there is generally, I mean, even myself, I've been, brought up to scratch about, basically providing support and stuff like that. In terms of mapping that I get involved to, so we've already been told, we may be needing to provide some level of support. And I can tell you quite clearly, a number of militaries around the world basically are already being spoken to about preparedness, to limit the amount of chaos in that regard. So, so these things are happening in the background. They're not talked about because they don't want to basically create even more panic or more, but, the reality is we really need to, use this information and focus on our families, focus on getting the message out there that people need to basically try and improve their immune system, through fasting, through basically eating properly, doing the right things, limiting those things that are going to be deleterious to themselves. Because basically, don't expect everything from government. Basically, you need to be proactive yourself. If you expect everything from government, you'll be very disappointed. Not a problem. I hope you enjoy it. Could it be an antibody-dependent virus? Not sure what you mean by that. Antibodies are created if, the body's fighting a virus. But, you know, yeah, there's plenty of information that's been looked at by a number of researchers, including in Australia. So, so in that regard, because actually the features, the characteristics are similar to a bat virus that we've had in Australia. And that's why the CSIRO, which is our scientific institution, the medical doctors that looked at it actually saw some similarities. So this coronavirus is very similar to, and I'm trying to remember the damn name. It was actually bats to horses, and then from horses to humans, and I forget the name of the damn thing. It'll probably come to me after this, but yeah. So how reliable the test kits? Well, let me put it this way: not some of them are, some of them it's a mixed bag. I think this has been a really rushed situation. There's also a potential vaccine being developed by the Japanese, but it's actually got really some bad side effects. It can affect pregnant women. It can affect potential reproductivity. So it's just people are just panicking and considering crazy sort of stuff. So yeah, just because people are at the top, you think they may be, always thinking straight. Sometimes, even they succumb to a bit of panicking, and we're all coronaviruses patient vaccinated. No idea, mate, whether they're all vaccinated or not. Vaccination has nothing to do with any virus or anything like that. The three things that basically, if you go back in history before in the early parts of the 20th century, way back, humans were basically being ravaged, not just ravaged by pathogens, bacterial, viral pathogens continuously. I mean, you just have to look at the history of humanity and the ravaging of viruses, tuberculosis, polio, one disease after another. It doesn't mean that the medical system, I mean, we are primitive, we humans. Our knowledge is still primitive, and sometimes certain doctors didn't do the right thing. They did, really, let's say, naughty experiments or stuff like that, the inappropriate things. But, desperate people do desperate things. It's like this sort of new viral thing, antiviral thing that the Japanese are sort of considering using. It's just another one of those crazy things, let's not go wild. We could create more problems than it's worth it. Maybe only use it on older people who don't have it, who their reproduction is unimportant. If it can save them, people that are really at high risk or at real risk. I mean, this is where a bit of you put your thinking cap on and you start thinking rationally and logically, what you should be doing and, how you should be targeting it in a smart way, so there's a lot of things, but those three things, vaccinations, antibiotics, and sanitation, is what basically has created the modern world where we hardly ever see mass deaths. We basically live in a time where the amount of deaths, communicable diseases, are very tiny. We go wild when just something like this turns up. If you go back in history, humanity was being ravaged. I mean, things like leprosy was all endemic, whole leprosy colonies all over the place around the world. You go back and look at history. I'm not saying that vaccines or misuse of antibiotics isn't a good thing. Vaccines misuse is not a good thing. Some people do react badly. That's, but a small percentage compared to if you don't vaccinate the population, they're ravaged by these diseases, more will die. then will be affected the small proportion. So in terms of balancing, the community sort of protection, some people actually having bad side effects. These are the sort of, I wouldn't want to be there to make these decisions, but sometimes somebody has to. We don't live in a perfect society or a perfect world, or have science sophistication developed enough to, like your Star Trek stuff you see, we're still primitive in the way we do things, to be able to basically make things that don't create any side effects and all that. Most people don't realize there is a duality of nature. That means nature has got like a mirror image of itself. So the other side of the mirror is basically this duality in nature, is basically what they try and eliminate. When they create a pharmaceutical or create something, they try and eliminate the other form, which is a side effect. But sometimes it's not very easy to do that, because one, it's expensive, and two, it's very hard to do. So they try every year, they try and improve the refinement to eliminate those sort of side effects. But those side effects is the other mirror of that basically substance. So, when you see it from that angle, you realize, it's not a conspiracy. It's just basically, we're dumb monkeys with inefficient tools, and tools that, that basically are more like, a hammer with a nail rather than, some refined tool. We're still there. We haven't become more sophisticated. In time, we probably will, but at this stage, a lot of our tools of the trade, of the medical trade, are still very unsophisticated. So the only thing we've got is to basically protect ourselves is through really good nutrition and taking care of ourselves most of the time. So that's the sort of really important take-home message. Saunas is very good. Look, saunas have got a hermetic effect and are good in that regard. So I wouldn't say they are bad. No idea what they ate, mate. No idea, sort of different populations eat different foods. Italians eat different from Chinese, from whatever. Everybody's susceptible. Food has nothing to do with it. If it had, the Italians would be immune. They're not. So in that regard. At what temperature does the virus die? Well, I'm not sure. I would say that at a certain temperature, probably a bit above 38, it would basically be impeded quite a bit. I mean, the body will fight it. I mean, the body knows how to fight it. If we give it the tools that it needs, the vitamin D, the zinc, that means eating the animal foods that have got zinc, selenium, all these things, eggs, steak and eggs, things like that, organ meats and stuff like that, that give you the B vitamins, all the nutrition you need in a way that is easily to assimilate in your body. Even vitamin D tablets are not perfect. I'll be honest with you. They can create, if you don't have enough MK4, and this is why I say, if you don't have enough MK4 and you don't have enough retinol, the animal forms, you can actually create imbalances when you're using supplementation. But if you're in winter and you've got no other option, you just have to. That's why I say, get yourself on a supplement, or eat brie. Brie's very high, or certain dairy products that are very high in MK4, or liver, things like that. So you gotta consider these other strategies of how to deal with. I never think that supplements are not the best option. But sometimes, because even supplements, because they're so refined, they're very high in deuterium. Deuterium isn't good for the mitochondria. But if you're having very small amounts, it's less of a problem. It's the quantity. It's like the quantity makes the poison. It's one of those things. It's sort of a balance. When you've got limited options, and you have to provide some information to people how they can mitigate certain things. And that's the thing. It's never a perfect answer. because if it was, we wouldn't have these problems in our world or anything else. It helps. It helps basically kill it off, together with, helping the T cells with the vitamin D. It's all synergistic. It's not one thing only. Well, that's a thing that I actually pointed on earlier about people using certain medication to suppress fever. They shouldn't. Unless your fever is extremely high, that's in a dangerous level, that's when you can use a bit, or even cold, like immersing yourself in cold water to reduce the level of the fever, like people used to. They used to get into cold water, to reduce the severity of that fever. Because at the end of the day, you want to keep your temperature at a certain level to when it goes far too high, then it can be dangerous for the brain as well. So you need to consider that. So there, and some people are not into basically cold showers and cold water and all that. So what do? You basically say, well, take a bit of of these medications that can bring down fever, but you don't want to take too high a dose. Take a smaller dose that brings it down to a level where you can manage it. Basically grow a spine, toughen up a bit, allow the body to basically fight the good fight, so to speak. But don't put yourself at risk with really high fever either. So it's a balancing act. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a balancing act. Okay, so I'll just go quickly through and I'll just overshot again. I don't believe I did this. Okay, let me just go through, and I'm looking at the time and it's dragging on a bit longer than I expected. Oh, look, there's actually a bit of studying happening in China at the moment. They're actually looking at certain things. Colloidal silver, yeah, can kill. Yeah, that's true. You can use, in moderation. It can help. But don't go crazy. You really need to use small amounts. It's synergistic with a lot of things. I don't really recommend colloidal silver to people generally, because basically a lot of people don't know how to use it properly. So if you know how to use it properly, fine. If you don't, give it a miss. Focus on those sort of things. Yep. Just focus on those sort of things. Exactly. Yes, I know what GABA is, but it's not going to be something that's going to save you. This is a respiratory infection type. That's what kills you. It's pneumonia. You get pneumonia, and if your body's weak, you basically you're at risk. Yeah, it probably will last about that long. I mean, it's just one of those things. Hopefully, by containing it the way they are containing it at the moment in most countries, what it happens is, amongst the people that it'll actually bounce back and forward. And what it does, it'll actually become less virulent, less dangerous, because when a virus can't spread, it adapts to its environment to survive longer in the host, because if it kills the host, then it can't survive, so it becomes less virulent. So it's actually a good thing. The longer it takes to contain it, the less problematic it will be in the future. So if we were allowing it to just run amok through the population, then it's more likely to basically be more lethal. So what the Chinese did by containing it for so long is probably they did the rest of us pretty much a good service, because they reduced the level of mutations that could take place, because it couldn't spread and mutate as rapidly. Look, a lot of people have high anxiety about this. Yeah, a lot of people basically, you know, at the end of the day, you really need to improve your immune system and immune function. That's really what you need to do, guys. Eat healthily, and and focus on that. It's a piss poor bioweapon if that was a bioweapon, So, and what's the logic? What's the strategy? Nations that release things, they've got a strategy. It's part of a warfare. If you look at the First World War, where they used mustard gas and they used a number of biological and chemical weapons, they used them in specific ways. They didn't use them everywhere in the battlefield. They used them at certain points in the battle in order to give themselves the advantage, or weakening the other side to get a flanking position. It's one thing. I'm a bit of a look. I've read from a very young age a lot of military stuff. So I've got a very good background in military strategy, military doctrine, even deep battle theory, which the Russians developed, and all sorts of things, and even some of the methods that were adopted, by the Americans in the actual Persian Gulf Wars. They actually used some of these Russian methods of deep battle strike doctrines. So I can tell you, when it comes to these things, these people, if they were actually doing something like that, they did a piss poor job. I can tell you, because it's not the way. There are other ways. I mean, we've got CRISPR now. If anybody knows about CRISPR, you can actually take and change specific parts of the DNA. I mean, the Chinese have used CRISPR for children that were born, that they actually did some of these, to make them, stronger and more intelligent or whatever. So they've done experiments. So they're less, they don't hold back when it comes to that sort of stuff. So if they wanted to make a perfect, bioweapon that would, let's say, take out just people with Caucasian background and whatever, they could have done a far better job than they've done. So, let's just get off this sort of, there's a lot of nonsense out there. So we shouldn't basically be creating hysteria based on, there's a lot of people that are saying things just because somebody says things. I say to those people, I may not have proof for that basically 100% that it's a bioweapon. I know it's not, because it doesn't make sense. It's a piss poor thing attempt anyway. But I say to those people, well, if you're making those claims, show us the evidence. All these people that are making claims, I've looked at on a number of websites, not one has come up with any really concrete good evidence. A lot of speculation, but that's just bullshit. You want to talk bullshit? Yeah, fine. For instance, most of these things are very hard to hide. Look at every single thing, event, or big conspiracy, or things that have happened in the past, whether it was the Bay of Pigs, whether it was basically, other conflicts and stuff like that, whether it was the Iran for Contra, sale, all that sort of stuff eventually came out. One thing about, there's always going to be somebody that's going to be a whistleblower, somebody that's going to reveal something. Nothing actually remains hidden, and documentation comes out eventually. So the reality is, if there would have been people who have been so disgusted and so angry. I mean, in parts of China, they were actually rioting, so, they would have basically brought this out. None of this stuff came out, and none of them will. And even Americans, if they had evidence that Chinese had done something, it would have been a big coup for them, because they're already on a bloody warpath with China. This would have been, more justification for saber rattling. So, there was somebody that had an interest to basically send military forces into the South China Sea, it would be the Americans. If they could basically milk this, they would milk it. They pretty much have come up, engineered lies in order to invade other countries. Do you think they wouldn't have, if they had an opportunity? But they know, it's, their own scientists have looked at it. They know it can't be a bioweapon. So that's what they're not making it. So how are they accusing China? They're just accusing China, that they tried to cover it up in the beginning. They weren't proactive enough. They didn't basically deal with it properly. So they're accusing China at that political level that they just didn't manage the situation as better than they should have. But if they had evidence otherwise, you think they wouldn't have been, you wouldn't have had Trump out there who can't hold his mouth for 1 second. He would have basically blurted out or twittered it and basically told the whole world how bad the Chinese were. Just think logically. Think about Trump in particular. So no, it's not. Let's just focus on what it is. It's a respiratory infection, and we need to protect ourselves and our families. That's where the focus should be, guys. Let's get off this conspiratorial stuff, because it doesn't help anyone. It actually puts people's lives at risk, most of the stuff that's out there. Heard that the test they're using is the same one they used for influenza A. Look, there are it is similar, because remember, the flu, like influenza A and all that, SARS, they're all corona types. So yeah, it's a modified version in that regard. But different laboratories are using slightly different variations of these corona-like type, kits. So I'm a bit concerned that there's not, that the governments are coordinating properly through the World Health Organization to sort of standardize some of this stuff. And that's where my concern is. And there may be, with some of the kits, they may not be as effective or as good at picking up certain things. And, commercial interests are being put ahead of people's health. There's a time when you can say, well, patents are unimportant, and government should just pass legislation scrapping those patents and saying, we will give you the funding and we will demand that you do the job properly, according to those specs that are going to give us the best results. That's what government should do. They should be a bit more proactive in doing those sort of things. That's where my criticism with governments is, that they're being too reactive, and they're not basically, taking these things serious, or trying to put, it's always, it's half measures here or there. And that's why we've got, all this panicking that people are doing with toilet paper and everything else, because there's a lot of things that are not being sort of properly dealt with in that regard. There is very little info on talking about pneumonia vaccines. Yeah, look, I know everywhere it's the same thing. There are two types of, there is one that covers 13 strains of pneumonia. That's the severe ones, and that's the ones that will really kill you. That's what you really need to be covered for. And then there's the other one that basically is for slightly more, not as dangerous pneumonia types, which is about 23 from memory. And that one is probably less important to be done. Most, I don't know about the UK, but I know in Australia that a lot of the actual doctors, in particular the ones that have got like older clients, they usually keep this vaccine on hand. And I know that it is available in some states, even to people that are younger, that may have a predisposition to pneumonia. That means, there's a family history where you've got you've got basically those pneumonia strains in your lungs. Most of my relatives, that's the way they went. My grandfather, my great grandfather, they believe he went from pneumonia at 107. My grandfather died at 87 from pneumonia. So did his brother at 89. Very a year later. So yeah, so it's just one of those things that more susceptible, and they had no other ailments whatsoever. It's just basically when you're older, your immune system is weaker. You've gone through much wear and tear through your life. Especially my grandfather and his brother, they went through the Second World War. Actually, my grandfather went through the First and Second World War. So they suffered a lot of deprivation, a lot of hunger, famine, and all sorts of things. So they were, their bodies were that they got that far was quite impressive without any other ailments and any medication or whatever. So but the reality is that that for whatever reason, I don't know, it's just what I said, because somebody asked me this before. It's basically like the scientists are over here and you've got the frontline doctors over here, and neither communicate. This reductionist sort of specialization that everybody's in. Nutritionists do their thing, frontline medicos do their thing, and all that. But the reality is, if you ask frontline doctors, and one of my cousins, he's head of his department in one of the hospitals in New South Wales, and basically, the reality is they're all specialists and focused in the sort of things that they deal with every day, and it's just this sort of reductionist approach, unfortunately, in medicine. They try to do the best thing. I mean, they're not angels, they're not perfect, but they're not out there trying to deliberately harm people. They're trying to help people, but it's the information. They're not aware. And I think governments here should have informed doctors much far better, to explain to them that this is a respiratory infection and pneumonia is one of the key things, coming from the research out of China. I just can't understand why governments aren't basically letting the general community know, and the doctors, that basically, because a lot of doctors that I've spoken to aren't aware to the same degree that I am about, the sort of the high risk of pneumonia in the population in regards to this new virus. So yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I'm just dumbfounded, but again, politicians that got no idea. It's just the same thing. I mean, I've seen politicians come through, look at stuff, and they go away. Then they make comments, and you go, "We didn't tell them that." They got whatever message they wanted to get. It's unfortunate. A lot of them are lawyers or accountants, and they got no fucking idea about science, technology, anything. So you tell them what goes in one ear, whatever registers in their head, that's what they blurt out. And we're to blame as a society that only vote in lawyers and accountants into government. And we end up with people that are completely uninformed and have got no idea about the real world. They know how to write beautiful piece of legislation that sound really eloquent, but beyond that, they got no fucking idea, about the real world. And that's our era. When there are people that are basically got doctors or whatever, got engineers or whatever, why aren't we voting for those people? we're encouraging independents to basically go forward and basically that can basically create a more diverse parliament and a more informed parliament. There's a lot of those things, unfortunate. And can you change them? Good luck. That's all I can say. My friend's daughter has COVID, is tested 4 times. First time was negative. Look, as I said, different kits, different, biologies. Sometimes things don't show up as well, So yeah, yep. So I'll put actually a link at the bottom, a post, like I did with the other one, and I'll actually provide that information, so to help in that regard. Based on last year's infection, Harry says, prime immune system for the latest. Look, it's a very different one, the last year's. So this is its protein coating, is different from it's closer to SARS, but not as bad as SARS. So a lot of people didn't get exposed to SARS, so we don't have a very strong immunity in that regard. But because it's weaker than SARS, it's only those who are vulnerable, weaker immune system, stuff like that. They're the ones that are being knocked off at this stage. But then again, through the year, it could mutate to something more nastier or something less nasty. It's really hard to say. Not sure about pets, to be honest. Unless you've basically got animals that are related to bats, unlikely. But then again, who knows? It's a very hard one. But at the moment, I haven't heard of any pets being infected by this. So I would say no, but not 100%. So things can mutate. Things can move from one species to another. It moved from bats to that, but I somehow don't think that there's a strong likelihood. There are more feline type viruses that actually can go to humans than dog ones. So cats may be more susceptible potentially, but that's just sheer speculation on my side, so I could be completely wrong. So don't take that as gospel. So it turned out into a talking virus with hands t-shirts. Yeah, I know. Yes, it's yeah, sort of there's a lot of that. Some people are going to make money out of it, like everything. It's all sorts of things. People will try to monetize on them. Yeah, look, viruses tend to move around. They'll move between similar hosts, or past hosts. So, and as I said, they do communicate with each other, and basically, if they've got an opportunity to become more virulent, they become more virulent. It really depends in that regard. So, it's one of those things. Okay. Okay. Look, I don't know about hydroxy chlorine. Yeah, I couldn't actually say. Look, things like zinc are very important. D are very important. So there's a bit of science behind those. And for this specific, I mean, there are other substances that sometimes can help when it comes to general viruses. But when it comes to this specific virus, that basically those little, knobs at the top there, they're specifically encoded to literally go for your lungs. So that's why pneumonia is the highest risk with this virus. So basically, that's where you really need vitamin D, because the regulation of collagen within your lungs is done by primarily vitamin D. Secondarily, retinol and MK4 play a limited role, but the key one that plays a role in the lungs is vitamin D. And actually, studies have shown that up to 4,000 IU, or 100 micrograms of vitamin D3 basically help reduce the effects of pneumonia. So, that's what you want to basically protect yourself against something like that has the potential to kill if it gets out of hand. So that's where the focus should be. Good nutrition in general, zinc, all these things, good animal nutrition plays a big role. But I would basically put at the top of the pyramid, vitamin D, and then all the other stuff. Selenium, as I said, very important, together with riboflavin, because that part of the redox, in terms of glutathione, very important, so if you want to upregulate glutathione, selenium, riboflavin, very important. So, and they're in animal products, that I've mentioned. You can look them up yourselves. So that's where the focus needs to be. But at the top, vitamin D3, that's what's going to basically provide the best thing. All the other strategies like fasting and stuff like that is all important. And g'day, mate. Good to see you. Must be early where you are at the moment. Jared will be tomorrow, or actually it's today, but in about 11 and a half hours from now, when I have my my regular live stream, Jared will be my special guest again. So, or in this case, he'll be sort of my guest host. So we'll be just answering general Q&A questions about carnivore, things that people want to bring up about the coronavirus or anything. It won't be the major focus. This is the focus, providing the general information about the coronavirus, answering some general questions that people have, and trying to focus on things that we can do, because we can speculate about conspiracies and all sorts of things and talk about things in that regard, and politics or whatever else. But at the end of the day, we need to protect ourselves and our families. We need the information that will help us in that regard. And, and as I said, it's a piss poor method of actually lowering your population. There are better ways. So, our focus needs to be on how to protect ourselves in an environment that's, that's basically, don't know, mate, about, teas and stuff like that. Most of those things, they're only marginally useful. What they do is they've got a hermetic effect, and what they do is they induce the upregulation of glutathione. That's all they do. But so many other things do. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the precursors that glutathione requires, like riboflavin, like selenium from animal foods, well, you're not going to get much of a boost. And at the end of the day, these are small grade toxins that you're putting in your body in order to induce that that hormetic effect. So we get enough hormesis, as I said. There's 5G hormesis. There's all sorts of hormesis around it. We don't need to overload our bodies with hormesis. Too much hormesis makes the body weak. We live in a very toxic environment with a lot of stress, with a lot of exercise, general stress, all these other things. They all have hormetic stress effects, But the reality is, when we were back there 10,000 years ago, we only had to deal with very, pathogens in our environment and the stresses from some plants that we used medicinally. Now we've got a raft of, heavy metals, all sorts of, the actual, all the particulates that come from the exhaust of vehicles. I mean, Ben Bickman he's been involved in a study just recently, and I think it came out this month. I haven't read it yet, but I will read it, and we'll probably have a chat at some stage about it. And what it actually shows is that if you're exposed to these particulates from exhausts, or from, like in China, or where the air pollution is really heavy, like in India as well, you can double your level of insulin response, and and affect your blood glucose and all that as well. Now, what do you think that does? It may explain the rapid increase in diabetes in both China and India. It may be another factor that's at play in those populations, because it's an interesting hypothesis, and an interesting bit of information that they've actually, they've done research on. So there's a lot of things that that are always coming out that are really important. And so, as I said, this is another susceptibility based on the recent forest fires in Australia, that people that have been probably exposed to these, to particulates and all that, may be more vulnerable. So I would say it may explain one reason why Sydney has higher levels, and than basically than basically a Melbourne. So it could be a factor at play. How much, hard to say. When it comes to epidemiology and observational studies of humans around the place, there's so much confounding and so much problems with those sort of studies. It's very hard to be 100% certain about a lot of things in that regard. Anyway, let me just see whether I can see something. Yes, people's lungs have definitely been compromised in one way or another, especially in our polluted environment, especially in China and India, where pollution levels are very high. It's not a good thing. I mean, it's probably another thing that I've sort of tried to myself is when I'm walking, either to work or different places, I sometimes try to look at before I leave the house, I look at the traffic, where there's more traffic, and I will basically walk through streets that have got less traffic, because it means that I'm going to be taking in less of those particulates and affecting me. So it's things like that to do. Thank you. That was one that we did recently. That's not an old one. The old ones, I don't know where he's got them. I don't think he knows where he's got them either, to be honest. Yeah. I need to harass him to basically go and see whether he can find them. Things everyone can do is boost immune function. That's it. Eat quality red meat, salt, eggs, fast, sleep well. That's what I should be doing now. It's 1 o'clock here in the morning. Get sun, heat, sauna, cold showers. I can only last for a couple of minutes under a cold shower. I can tell you, I do it very rarely because it's just too hard. Do breathing exercise to lower cortisol. Yep. Salt also lowers cortisol, remember? So, yeah, do those sort of things and you will be better for it in that way. Yeah, I know. It's definitely past my bloody bedtime, definitely past. Circadian rhythms are going to be out of whack tomorrow. I'll be yawning. Anyway, guys, had fun. This was supposed to be for an hour. It's gone for 2 hours, like these things do. Especially when I start talking. But anyway, it took a bit longer to basically go through all that list that I had. And there's probably one or two things that I missed potentially. But look, on tomorrow's Q&A, if you've got some specific question, don't bother with conspiratorial stuff. I don't believe in it. If there was basically, if somebody was designing a bioweapon, they got CRISPR, they got technology that could make something a hell of a lot better and target it against specific populations. It's bloody piss poor if that was their effort. I would say the Chinese should give up bioweapons if that was their effort. No, that's it's nonsense, guys. This is just one of those diseases that have just jumped between species. The one that I'm really worried about is this one is Ebola. Ebola is becoming less virulent. The first time it killed a lot of people very fast. This time, about the last time, that it actually spread further and it was less virulent. So, and it's got a high mortality rate. That's the one that I really worry about. One of these days, really get spreading its wings. Far more than even this one, because this one's even weaker than SARS. It's 2.5 times weaker than SARS. So in that regard, it's not the big killer. SARS was a much more dangerous killer, and the other one in the Middle East was even more lethal than even it was. Nearly had the same virulence, just below that of Ebola. So, there have been worse. This hasn't been the worst. And I think governments have overreacted at one level and underreacted another level, and not really because of ignorance. If they understood the type of thing, they would basically be saying right now that we should be going into all the actual homes and all the actual retirement homes that are around and stuff like that, where there are retirees, and basically giving them the option to do do the vaccine, for pneumonia. That would possibly save a lot of lives. But what have they done? They've scared the population. They've done all these other things that basically have not helped as much. And they haven't even actually, they've been half-hearted, in committing, substantial money. It's only very recently the Australian government really put its hand in its pocket, because they've been running after a surplus. And because eventually they realised, well, we're not going to get a surplus anyway, now they're putting their hand in their pocket, Johnny come lates, where they should have basically been putting their hand in their pocket much earlier to basically, deal with the ramifications and the fallout of this, and, prepare and provide the money to get more kits out there, to get get better information, and a whole lot of other things. I mean, they're starting to get that information out now, but it's been very slow. And in North America, even it's even been slower. I mean, the US government has just been abysmal in its preparation. In comparison to many other, and Italy, God Almighty, it's just now that they're starting to react. And they're reacting very poorly anyway. So yes, unfortunately, we never learn, and make a mess of things. Anyway, guys, I better go. good night. Thanks for being here. And look, take care of yourselves, take care of your families, use this information. Like and subscribe to my channel. Please share this video and the previous one on corona on your Facebook or your Instagram or Twitter account or whatever. Get the information out there, because a lot of people have got a lot of misinformation and they're unaware of some of the things that they can incorporate in their diet, in their lifestyle, to basically mitigate and reduce the risk of them dying, if they're in those, especially if they've got family members which are in those more riskier age brackets, or family members that have got pre-existing conditions that make them more vulnerable. Anyway, good night, guys. It was, I love chatting with you. I will see you in about, what is it? About 11 odd hours from now. Take care and see you soon.